Imagine your life, your fortune, built on a foundation of trust. Now picture a whisper, a child's innocent words threatening to shatter it all. Before we dive in, if you believe that truth, no matter how small the voice, can change the world, hit that like button and stick around. You won't believe what unfolds. 8-year-old Emily Monroe had learned early on that silence could be her greatest ally. In the 3 foster homes before this sprawling suburban estate, watching, truly observing, had been her survival mechanism. It taught her the crucial difference between a reassuring smile and the cold glint in an adult's eyes that hinted at hidden intentions. Now, standing hesitantly in the doorway of Ethan's home office, she instinctively watched again. Her adoptive father, Ethan Monroe, a man barely 30 years old but already a multi-millionaire thanks to his cutting-edge cybersecurity empire, sat rigidly at his large mahogany desk. The cool blue light emanating from his computer screen cast an almost ethereal glow on his focused face. Outside the tall picture windows, the afternoon sun streamed in, painting long, geometric shadows across the room, a space filled with the low hum and rhythmic blinking of sophisticated technology, a digital heartbeat that mirrored the pulse of Ethan's high-stakes world. He barely registered Emily's presence, his fingers a blur across the keyboard as he spoke intently into his headset, a cascade of encryption algorithms and security protocols filling the air. To most, Ethan Monroe was a visionary, a modern-day genius. To Emily, after 6 months of living in his immense home, he remained a well-intentioned stranger, a provider of comfort and security, yet someone who could, at any moment, decide she didn't quite fit into his meticulously ordered life. He'd given her a beautiful room, access to the best schools, more toys than she'd ever dreamed of owning. But these gifts felt transactional, much like the efficient management of his business accounts, delivered with good intentions, yet lacking genuine warmth. Emily's small hand traced the ornate frame of the doorway as she gathered her courage. There were unsettling things she needed to tell him, observations that had tied her stomach in knots of worry. But every time she attempted to broach a significant topic with Ethan, his gaze seemed to pass right through her, as if she were simply another logistical puzzle to be solved with financial resources and careful planning. The monotonous drone of the Zoom call continued, Ethan's voice weaving through discussions of firewalls and impenetrable data protection with a group of anonymous executives. Emily shifted her weight from one foot to the other, 10 long minutes ticking by as she waited for him to acknowledge her. Then, an almost imperceptible detail caught her eye, something that nudged her forward. Later, she wouldn't be able to articulate exactly what spurred her, but perhaps it was the way the light glinted off a tiny dark object nestled behind the ornate, gilt-framed landscape painting Sabrina had gifted Ethan just the previous month. Or maybe it was the echo of her own mother's gentle but firm voice, a distant memory whispering that truth, however uncomfortable, held more value than mere politeness. Or perhaps, as is often the case with children, her 8-year-old heart simply knew something that Ethan's 30-year-old logic-driven mind had overlooked. Emily walked softly to the side of Ethan's large leather chair and gently tugged on the sleeve of his expensive suit jacket. Without even a glance, he held up a single finger, the universal adult signal for wait. But Emily had waited long enough. She tugged again, a little more insistently this time. "Just a second, sweetie," Ethan murmured, his focus unwavering on the figures and graphs on his screen. This time, Emily didn't wait for permission. She leaned in close to his ear, the silence of the high-tech office amplifying her small voice as she whispered the 8 words that would unravel everything he thought he knew. "There's a camera in your office, but it's not yours." The effect was immediate, almost cinematic. Ethan's fingers froze mid-type above the illuminated keyboard. His entire body seemed to lock up, becoming as rigid as if he'd been struck by an invisible jolt of electricity. The disembodied voice of the executive on the Zoom call continued its steady stream of quarterly projections and market analysis. But for Ethan, the world had narrowed to the echoing impact of those 8 simple words spoken by the small girl beside him. "Gentlemen," he said abruptly, his voice betraying a tremor he couldn't quite control, "I need to call you back." He ended the meeting without further explanation, leaving a stunned silence in its wake, broken only by the gentle hum of the sophisticated electronics and the suddenly deafening thumping of his own heartbeat. He swiveled in his chair, finally turning to look at Emily, really look at her, perhaps for the first time since she had come to live in his home. Her brown eyes, usually so quiet and filled with a cautious observation, now blazed with a startling urgency. "What did you say?" he asked, the question almost a reflex, as he had heard her perfectly. "There's a camera in your office," Emily repeated, her small finger pointing with unwavering certainty towards the landscape painting hanging above his meticulously organized bookshelf, behind the gold frame. "I've been watching it blink at night when you're not here." Ethan's gaze followed her pointed finger to the expensive oil painting, a piece Sabrina had insisted on purchasing for him just last month. A romantic landscape of rolling hills and wildflowers to brighten up your workspace, she'd purred with that devastating smile he'd found so captivating. Every successful man needs beauty in his environment. A sudden dryness filled Ethan's mouth as disparate puzzle pieces began clicking into place with alarming mechanical precision. Sabrina's uncharacteristic and sudden interest in his detailed work schedule, her almost compulsive habit of tidying his office while he was engrossed in conference calls, the uncanny way she always seemed to know exactly when he'd be working late, appearing with a perfectly timed cup of artisanal coffee and a lingering kiss. "How long have you been watching it?" he asked Emily, his voice barely above a strained whisper, the weight of her words beginning to sink in. "Since she hung it up," Emily said simply, her gaze direct and unwavering. "I use my tablet to scan for signals when I can't sleep. There are lots of them in the house now, but that one's different. It's not connected to our network." Ethan stared at this small girl, this child he had taken into his home, who had just, with a single whispered sentence, turned his meticulously constructed world upside down. In the 6 months they had lived together, they had barely scratched the surface of a real conversation. He had focused on providing the best for her, the best nannies, enrollment in the most prestigious private schools, a veritable mountain of toys. But he had provided these things with the same detached efficiency he applied to managing his business accounts, with good intentions certainly, but with a profound lack of genuine connection. He had never truly listened to her. He had never imagined that behind those quiet, watchful eyes lay a mind so sharp, so keenly attuned, that it could detect sophisticated surveillance equipment that he, a cybersecurity expert by trade, had completely missed. The full weight of Emily's revelation began to settle in his chest, a cold, hard knot of dread. If there was a camera, if someone was actively watching him, and if Sabrina, the woman he thought he loved, was somehow involved, then the prototype security algorithm he had been tirelessly developing, a project worth potentially hundreds of millions of dollars, his legacy in the tech world, sat vulnerably on the very computer he used every day, right here in this compromised room. "Emily," he said, the sound of her name feeling foreign on his tongue, and for the first time he truly saw her, not as an act of charity, not as a responsibility to be managed, but as a person, an individual with her own perceptions and insights, someone who might just have inadvertently saved him from a catastrophe he hadn't even seen brewing. "We need to talk." Emily's startling revelation hung in the air between them, thick and palpable, like the lingering scent of smoke after a fire has just begun to smolder. Ethan pushed back from his mahogany desk, the leather of his chair creaking softly, his mind racing, a chaotic whirlwind of terrifying implications and urgent possibilities. Meanwhile, the 8-year-old girl who had just potentially saved his entire empire sat quietly, her gaze steady, waiting patiently for him to fully process the enormity of what she had told him. The contrast between her calm demeanor and his inner turmoil was stark. "Show me," he said finally, his voice firm despite the underlying anxiety. "Show me everything you've seen." For the first time since she had arrived at his large, impersonal house, Emily's expression softened. A genuine smile touched her lips. Not the polite, carefully constructed smile she usually offered adults, but a real smile, filled with a flicker of hope. Someone was finally listening. She turned and retrieved her tablet from where she had left it on the polished hallway table, her small fingers moving with surprising dexterity and confidence across the glass screen. Ethan watched, a strange mix of fascination and growing dread churning within him, as she navigated through a series of apps he didn't recognize. "I learned this from watching you," she explained, her voice matter-of-fact as she pulled up a sophisticated-looking signal detection program. When you were working on the router configuration last month, I downloaded it to see what was making my room feel buzzy at night. The tablet screen filled with a complex network map of their sprawling home. Ethan immediately recognized his own devices, his array of computers, his smartphones, the various smart home systems, even the integrated security cameras. But then he saw them, a cluster of unfamiliar signals glowing ominously on the digital map, sending a chill down his spine. Emily pointed to a specific grouping of red dots. These appeared after Sabrina started visiting more often, she explained, her small finger hovering over the screen. This big one, she indicated a prominent red circle, is right behind your painting. She then pointed to a smaller dot nestled within the digital blueprint of the living room. This smaller one is in the living room, inside that crystal vase she brought you. With a swipe of her finger, she scrolled to another section of the map, highlighting the master bedroom. And this one is in your nightstand. Ethan's world seemed to tilt on its axis. The woman he had been falling in love with, the woman he had been seriously considering asking to marry him, had been systematically bugging his own home. Every private conversation, every confidential business call, every intimate moment they had shared, all of it potentially recorded and transmitted to unknown recipients. The implications were staggering, painting a terrifying picture of calculated deception. "How long have you known?" he asked Emily, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice despite the inner turmoil. 3 weeks, Emily said quietly, her gaze dropping momentarily. "I kept trying to tell you." Her voice trailed off, but they both understood the unspoken words. He had been too preoccupied, too consumed by his demanding work and by Sabrina's intoxicating presence, to truly pay attention to anything an 8-year-old might have to say. A wave of shame washed over Ethan as he recognized his own blindness. "Tell me about Sabrina," he said, his voice now firm with a newfound resolve. "What have you seen her do?" Emily's expression shifted, the innocent curiosity replaced by a serious, almost adult watchfulness. Ethan now recognized this look. It meant she was meticulously recalling details, her young mind acting like a flawless recorder. Children who had navigated the complexities of the foster care system often developed this heightened sense of observation, a necessary skill for survival, allowing them to pick up on subtle cues and inconsistencies that adults often missed. Their well-being had once depended on accurately reading the intentions behind smiles and words. "She comes here when you're not home, sometimes," Emily began, her voice low and deliberate. "She has a key, but she always acts surprised when I see her, like she forgot I'd be here. She says she's cleaning or organizing, but she never actually cleans anything." Ethan's hands clenched into fists beneath the surface of his desk. He had given Sabrina a key 3 months ago, a gesture that had felt deeply romantic and significant at the time. She had even teared up when he presented it to her, whispering about how no one had ever trusted her like that before. The memory now felt sickeningly manipulative. "She goes through your office," Emily continued, her gaze unwavering. "Not just looking around, but photographing things. She has this tiny camera, smaller than a phone. I saw her take pictures of papers on your desk, and she always puts them back exactly where they were." She paused, her brow furrowed in thought. "What else?" She asks me questions. Emily's voice grew even quieter, almost hesitant. "About your schedule, about when you work late, about your friends. She makes it seem like she's just being nice, trying to get to know me better." A flicker of understanding crossed Ethan's face. "But foster kids learn to recognize when adults are fishing for information," Emily added, her voice holding a wisdom beyond her years. The simple words hit Ethan with the force of physical blows. Every casual conversation with Sabrina, every seemingly innocent question she had posed about his work, his key business relationships, his daily routines, flashed through his mind, now imbued with a sinister new context. It had all been intelligence gathering, a carefully orchestrated effort to extract information, and she had been using Emily, an 8-year-old child who had already experienced abandonment and betrayal by the very adults meant to protect her, as an unwitting source. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. There's something else, Emily said, her brown eyes meeting his directly, holding a depth of understanding that belied her age. I think someone else is helping her. What do you mean? Ethan asked, his voice tight with apprehension. Miles comes by sometimes, when you're traveling. He and Sabrina meet in your office. They whisper a lot and look at papers together. Last week I heard him say something about making sure the timeline matches the product launch. Miles Wren, Ethan's CFO, one of his oldest and closest friends. They had built their company together from the ground up, sharing late nights, shared dreams, shared struggles, and what Ethan had believed was genuine camaraderie and unwavering loyalty. If Miles was involved, Ethan's rational mind recoiled, desperately trying to reject the very notion. These were extraordinary accusations, leveled against people he trusted, people he cared about. But the mounting evidence, the sophisticated surveillance equipment detected throughout his supposedly secure home, painted a grim picture that he could no longer ignore. Emily, Ethan said carefully, choosing his words with precision, why didn't you just ask me about the devices? Why did you investigate on your own? Emily looked down at her tablet, suddenly appearing very small and vulnerable. Because adults don't usually believe kids, she said softly, her voice tinged with a sadness that tugged at Ethan's heart, especially kids like me. And because, she paused, struggling with something unspoken, because I thought maybe you already knew. Maybe it was part of your security system, and I was just being paranoid. The simple admission, the quiet revelation of her fear of being dismissed, and her attempt to rationalize the disturbing evidence broke something inside Ethan's chest. This brilliant, observant child had been carrying the immense weight of this discovery alone for weeks, navigating a treacherous landscape of suspicion and uncertainty, unsure whether to trust her own perceptions or the dismissive indifference of the adults around her. In her own quiet way, she had been trying to protect him, while simultaneously guarding herself against the familiar sting of not being believed. I believe you, Ethan said firmly, his voice resonating with a conviction that surprised even himself. And I'm so incredibly sorry that I didn't listen sooner. A radiant smile bloomed on Emily's face, chasing away the shadows of worry that had clouded her young features. So what do we do now? For the first time in their 6 months together, Ethan looked at Emily not as a dependent, not as a project to be managed, but as a partner. Her keen insights had already proven more valuable than those of his entire highly paid security team. Her careful observation and unexpected technological aptitude had uncovered a sophisticated espionage operation that could have destroyed everything he had painstakingly built. A surge of respect and a pang of guilt washed over him. We figure out exactly what they're after, he said, his voice now filled with a steely resolve, and we stop them. Remember this, Emily, he added, looking directly into her wise young eyes. Trust isn't freely given. It's earned, especially in moments like these. This reminds us that in life, the most significant bonds are often forged in the crucible of adversity. Think about a time when someone completely unexpected stepped up for you, surprising you with their wisdom, their strength, or their unwavering loyalty. These are the moments that truly define relationships. The next morning dawned gray and drizzling, the dreary weather outside mirroring the heavy weight of secrets that now permeated every corner of Ethan's usually bright and airy house. He had spent a restless night staring at the ceiling, his mind a relentless churn of terrifying implications and desperate possibilities, while Sabrina had slept peacefully beside him, her every breath now feeling like a carefully constructed lie, every unconscious touch a calculated betrayal. Emily found him in the large, modern kitchen at the first hint of dawn, dark circles underscoring his tired eyes as he mechanically stirred a cup of coffee he knew he wouldn't drink. She was already dressed for school, her small backpack slung over her shoulder, but her usually subdued expression suggested she had endured a night of troubled thoughts as well. We need help, she said without preamble, her voice surprisingly steady as she settled onto a sleek bar stool across the granite countertop from him. I've been thinking about it all night. If Miles is involved, we can't trust anyone from your company. And if Sabrina even suspects we know, she might destroy evidence or just disappear. Ethan marveled yet again at this child's remarkable clarity of thought. At 30, he had built a multi-million-dollar empire through strategic thinking and meticulously calculated risks. Yet Emily, at just 8 years old, and with no formal training in business or espionage, had immediately grasped the core of their precarious situation. "Who do you suggest?" he asked, his curiosity about her perspective genuine. "Josephine," Emily said, without a moment's hesitation. Josephine Chen, their quiet and efficient property manager. She's been with your family since before you even started the company. She sees everything that happens in this house, but people treat her like she's invisible. Emily paused, her usual confidence momentarily wavering. "She's the only adult who's ever really listened to me here." Josephine Chen had been a fixture in the Monroe family's lives for 15 years, ever since Ethan's parents had first hired her to manage their sprawling estate. When they tragically died in a car accident 5 years prior, Ethan had kept her on, partly out of loyalty to his parents' memory, and partly because she ran his complicated household with a quiet, almost invisible efficiency that freed him to focus entirely on his demanding business. At 69, Josephine had witnessed 3 generations of Monroes navigate their triumphs and endure their share of heartaches. More importantly, as Emily had astutely observed, Josephine was one of the few people in Ethan's orbit who treated the 8-year-old like a person, with genuine respect and quiet consideration, rather than as a project or an afterthought. "Josephine it is," Ethan decided, a sense of quiet certainty settling over him. "Emily, can you ask her to meet us in the library after school? Tell her it's important, but don't say why over the phone." Emily nodded solemnly, her young mind already grasping the critical implications of operational security better than many adults Ethan knew. She slipped off the bar stool and headed toward the door, then turned back, her small voice a little softer now, tinged with a vulnerability that reminded Ethan she was still just a child carrying an enormous burden. "Ethan, what if we're wrong? What if Sabrina really loves you and there's some other explanation for all of this?" The question revealed both her sharp intellect and her surprisingly resilient heart. Even after everything she had observed, even with the growing mountain of disturbing evidence, Emily was still clinging to the hope that she might be mistaken, that the adults in her life could be trusted, that the family she had tentatively begun to build was real and safe. "Then we'll figure that out too," Ethan said gently, meeting her gaze with reassurance. "But Emily," he added, his voice firm, "your instincts have been right about everything so far. Don't doubt yourself now." That afternoon, the unlikely trio gathered in Ethan's large home library, a hushed sanctuary surrounded by towering shelves of books that represented decades of little things that didn't quite add up. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "She knew too much about your business schedules, seemed too interested in specific details about your friends and associates, and," Josephine continued, her gaze direct, "she has a way of watching people when she thinks they're not looking." "What kind of watching?" Ethan asked, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. "The kind that measures and calculates," Josephine replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "I've seen it before, in people who aren't what they pretend to be. She studies you, Mr. Ethan, studies this house, studies your routines. It's not the way someone in love observes their partner. It's the way someone gathers intelligence." Emily leaned forward eagerly, her eyes bright with anticipation. "You've noticed other things too, haven't you, Josephine?" Josephine turned to the young girl and offered a small, genuine smile, a rare display of affection. "You see everything, don't you, little one?" She then turned back to Ethan. "Yes, I've noticed other things. Phone calls she takes in her car after visiting, the way she's always here during important business calls, even when she claims to be busy elsewhere. And yesterday," Josephine's voice took on a sharper edge, "I found her in your father's old office at 6 o'clock in the morning, supposedly looking for a book." 6 a.m.? Ethan's voice sharpened with disbelief. "She said she couldn't sleep and wanted to borrow something to read," Josephine explained, "but she was standing by your computer, not anywhere near the bookshelves, and she looked startled, almost guilty, when I appeared." The 3 of them sat in a heavy silence, the weight of the accumulated evidence pressing down on them. Separately, each observation might have been dismissed, explained away as coincidence or misinterpretation. But taken together, they painted a disturbingly clear picture of systematic deception and calculated surveillance. "So, what's our next move?" Josephine asked, her directness cutting through the tense atmosphere. It was then that Ethan fully realized Josephine had seamlessly positioned herself as an integral part of their team. This elegant, dignified woman, who had spent decades managing households and quietly safeguarding family secrets, was now ready to help them expose a dangerous conspiracy that threatened everything they held dear. "We need proof," Ethan said, his voice firm with renewed purpose. "Real, irrefutable evidence that will hold up if this goes to court or gets reported to the authorities. And we need to find out who she's working for and what they're really after." "I can help with that," Emily said quietly, her gaze steady. "The surveillance devices she planted, they work both ways. If I can access their signals, I might be able to trace where they're transmitting to, maybe even intercept what they're sending." Both adults stared at her in a mixture of astonishment and burgeoning hope. This unassuming 8-year-old girl was calmly proposing to conduct counter-surveillance operations that would challenge even experienced intelligence professionals. "Where did you learn to do that, Emily?" Josephine asked gently, a hint of amusement in her voice. Emily shrugged, suddenly looking a little embarrassed. "I read a lot," she mumbled. "And I watch you work," she added, turning to Ethan. "Your cybersecurity programs aren't that different from the apps kids use to monitor network traffic for gaming. I just adapted them." Ethan felt a surge of something akin to pride, quickly followed by a sharp pang of protective worry. Emily's capabilities were undeniably remarkable, but she was still a child, and one who had already endured more than her fair share of hardship. The last thing he wanted was to put her in further danger. "Absolutely not," he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This is getting too dangerous for you to be involved." Emily's expression immediately shifted. Her brown eyes, usually so soft, now flashed with a stubborn determination that Ethan was beginning to recognize as uniquely her own. "I'm already involved," she stated flatly. "I'm the one who discovered this, and I'm the only one who's been successfully watching them without being detected." Josephine nodded slowly in agreement. "She's right, Mr. Ethan," she said quietly. "And more than that, she's been keeping herself safe in this house for months while observing things the rest of us missed. Emily isn't just smart, she's careful. She survives situations that would break most adults." Ethan looked from Emily to Josephine, these two remarkable females who had somehow become his most trusted allies in the span of just 24 hours. An 8-year-old girl with the observational skills of a trained operative and the unwavering moral clarity of someone who had learned to distinguish truth from deception through sheer necessity. And a 69-year-old woman who had spent decades watching and protecting, whose quiet wisdom understood loyalty and recognized threats with an experience that transcended age. He took a deep breath. "All right," he said finally, his voice a blend of concern and reluctant acceptance. "But we do this together. No one takes risks alone. We watch out for each other." A wide, genuine smile lit up Emily's face, a smile that radiated pure relief and a sense of belonging. "So, we're like a real family now." The simple, direct question caught Ethan off guard, hitting him with an unexpected emotional force. Family. Not the arrangement of convenience and obligation he had thought he was providing, but something real, something chosen, something mutual. A warmth spread through his chest, chasing away some of the cold dread. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with a sincerity that resonated deep within him. "Yes, Emily, we're like a real family now." This situation underscores a powerful truth. Sometimes the most unlikely allies become the strongest teams. Think about a time in your own life when someone completely unexpected stood beside you during a difficult challenge. Often it's in these moments of shared adversity that the deepest and most meaningful connections are forged. 3 days later, their carefully laid plans nearly collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Ethan stood in the middle of his now sterile-feeling office, holding the tiny, sophisticated surveillance device Josephine had carefully extracted from behind Sabrina's landscape painting. The evidence, now physically in his hand, was undeniable. A piece of high-tech equipment worth thousands of dollars, silently broadcasting on encrypted frequencies to receivers they had traced to a nondescript location downtown. But when he had confronted Sabrina with it just an hour earlier, expecting guilt, a tearful confession, or at the very least, a flicker of surprise, She had looked at him with such genuine confusion and wounded innocence that a seed of doubt had begun to sprout in his mind, threatening to undermine everything Emily and Josephine had uncovered. "You think I'm spying on you?" she had whispered, her green eyes welling up with perfectly timed tears. "Ethan, how could you even imagine I would do something like that?" Her reaction had been so flawless, so utterly believable, that for a fleeting moment, Ethan had found himself wondering if they had all made a terrible, catastrophic mistake. This is a classic example of how skilled manipulators can exploit our deepest desires. In this case, Ethan's yearning for a loving partner to sow doubt and confusion, even in the face of concrete evidence. Sabrina was, after all, an actress by training, a media-savvy professional who understood exactly how to manipulate emotions and perceptions. But the pain in her eyes had seemed so real, so raw. Maybe there's another explanation, he had found himself stammering, hating the uncertainty in his own voice. Maybe someone else planted these devices, someone trying to frame you or destroy our relationship. Sabrina had immediately seized the opportunity, throwing herself into his arms, sobbing against his chest, whispering frantic words about how scared she was, how someone must be targeting them, how grateful she was that he was willing to consider her innocence. And it was at that precise moment that Emily had walked into the room. The 8-year-old had taken one look at the carefully staged scene. Sabrina clinging to Ethan, the incriminating surveillance device lying abandoned on his desk, and her young face had gone completely blank. Not hurt, not disappointed, but utterly empty. A shudder slamming down on her emotions. It was an expression Ethan recognized with a painful jolt, a relic from their first few difficult weeks together when she had still been bracing herself for the inevitable rejection and abandonment she had come to expect. "Emily, sweetheart," he had started, reaching out a hand towards her, but she had simply turned and walked away without uttering a single word. Now, an hour later, a frantic search of the house had yielded nothing. Josephine was methodically canvassing the grounds, while Ethan had combed through every room, calling Emily's name, his anxiety escalating with each empty space he encountered. He finally found her in the last place he had thought to look, the small, dusty storage room tucked away behind the detached garage, a repository for forgotten furniture and off-season holiday decorations. She was curled up behind a stack of dusty cardboard boxes, her tablet clutched tightly against her chest, her face streaked with tears she had clearly tried to wipe away. "Emily?" he said softly, sinking down beside her onto the cold concrete floor, his heart aching at the sight of the profound defeat etched on her small frame. "Talk to me, sweetheart." "You don't believe me," she said quietly, her voice muffled, her gaze fixed on the worn linoleum floor. "I showed you everything. I explained everything, but you still choose her." "That's not true, Emily," Ethan said, his voice filled with genuine remorse. "I do believe you. The evidence. It's overwhelming." "Then why is she still here?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through Ethan like a sharp blade. "Why are you letting her cry on you and tell you she's innocent when we both know she's lying?" Ethan had no immediate answer for that. Or rather, he had an answer, a truth he was deeply ashamed to admit. Despite everything they had discovered, despite the undeniable surveillance equipment and the documented pattern of deception, a part of him, a foolish, vulnerable part, still desperately wanted to believe Sabrina's carefully constructed innocence. Part of him was still susceptible to her tears, her explanations, and the intoxicating possibility that this was all some terrible misunderstanding, that the picture Emily and Josephine had painted was somehow wrong. "Adults are complicated, Emily," he said lamely, the words sounding weak even to his own ears. Sometimes we want things to be true, even when we know they're not." Emily finally looked up at him, and the raw disappointment in her wide brown eyes was devastating. "I thought you were different," she said, her voice filled with a profound sadness. I thought you actually listened." "I am listening," Ethan insisted, his voice rising slightly. "I did listen." "No," she said with the terrible, unwavering clarity of a child who had been let down too many times. "You listened to what I said, but you didn't believe it was more important than what you wanted to believe." just like all the other adults. And in that moment, Ethan knew, with a clarity that pierced through his self-deception, that she was right. They both knew it. He had spent his entire adult life making hard, data-driven decisions based on evidence and logic, swiftly cutting ties with people who threatened his business or betrayed his trust. But when it came to Sabrina, when it came to his own deep-seated emotional needs and desires, he had wavered. He had allowed doubt to creep in. Not because the evidence was weak, but because accepting it fully would mean losing something he desperately wanted to keep. He had prioritized his own emotional comfort over the clear and present danger Emily had bravely brought to light. "You're right," he said quietly, the words heavy with regret. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry." Emily studied his face with those two wise, assessing eyes, eyes that had seen far too much for their young age. "Are you sorry enough to do something about it?" "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, a flicker of understanding beginning to dawn. "I mean," Emily said, her voice gaining a new edge of urgency, "Sabrina is still in our house right now, probably planting more devices or stealing more information while we're out here talking. I mean, Miles is probably getting a report from her tonight about how successfully she handled your suspicions. I mean, they're going to keep doing this, Ethan, until they get whatever they came for. And then they'll just disappear and leave us with nothing." A cold wave of clarity washed over Ethan. He felt something shift deep within his chest, a hardening of resolve that reminded him of the decisive, strategic mindset that had propelled his success in the cutthroat world of business. Emily was right. While he had been wrestling with his own emotions and clinging to impossible explanations, the people who had so coldly betrayed their trust were likely making their final, calculated moves. "What do you need me to do, Emily?" he asked, his voice now stripped of any lingering doubt. "I need you to trust me," Emily said simply, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Not just believe me, but actually trust me enough to let me help catch them. I've been working on something while you were figuring things out." She opened her tablet and showed him a screen filled with a dizzying array of data streams and complex network traffic, a digital landscape that looked strikingly similar to his own advanced cybersecurity programs. "I've been monitoring their communications for the past 3 days. They're planning something big for tomorrow night, something called final extraction that involves your prototype algorithm." "How do you know all this?" Ethan asked, his mind reeling at her capabilities. "Because I hacked their surveillance system," Emily said matter-of-factly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The same way they've been watching us, Ethan. I've been watching them." Her voice grew harder now, more determined than any 8-year-olds should ever need to be. "They're not just stealing your algorithm. They're planning to destroy your reputation by making it look like you sold it voluntarily. Miles has been preparing documents that make you look like a willing collaborator." The final, chilling piece of the puzzle clicked into place with crystalline clarity. This wasn't just industrial espionage. It was a meticulously orchestrated act of character assassination, designed to completely destroy him while enriching his enemies. And he had almost allowed it to happen, all because he had been too emotionally compromised to trust the one person who had been tirelessly trying to save him. Ethan looked at this remarkable child, a girl who had been abandoned by multiple families, who had learned to read deception and betrayal in adults' faces as a fundamental survival skill, who had used her pain and experience to develop instincts and abilities that had already saved him once. "I trust you, Emily," he said, his voice filled with a profound sincerity, and this time he meant it completely. "What's the plan?" A fierce, determined smile spread across Emily's face, a smile that hinted at the strategic mind whirring beneath her youthful exterior. "We're going to give them exactly what they want," she said, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "And when they reach for it, they're going to find we've set a trap of our own." The hardest lessons in life often come when we realize our hearts and our minds are telling us completely different things. Have you ever faced a situation where you desperately wanted to believe one thing, even though deep down you knew the truth was something else entirely? It's in those moments of cognitive dissonance that true character is tested. The truth began to emerge in fragmented pieces over the next 18 hours, each new revelation more damning than the last. Josephine, with her characteristic quiet efficiency, provided the first breakthrough. While meticulously sorting through months of financial records, a task she often, while meticulously sorting through months of financial records, a task she often performed with the quiet dedication of a seasoned auditor. Josephine found the first undeniable breakthrough. She had quietly, almost imperceptibly, been investigating Miles Wren, Ethan's trusted CFO and supposed best friend. Her meticulous review unearthed 3 separate wire transfers, totaling a staggering $200,000, deposited into Miles's personal accounts over the past 6 months. The money, Josephine grimly informed Ethan as they huddled around her laptop in the hushed library, had originated from a labyrinthine network of shell companies, ultimately traced back to Apex Industries, Ethan's largest, most aggressive competitor in the fiercely competitive cybersecurity market. "He's been selling you out from the beginning, Mr. Ethan," Josephine stated, her voice tight with disbelief and anger. "Every business strategy, every confidential client meeting, every product development timeline, he's had access to all of it, and he's been feeding it directly to your rivals." But it was Emily, with her unparalleled instincts and uncanny technological prowess, who truly uncovered the chilling scope of their betrayal. Utilizing techniques that impressed even Ethan's professional paranoia, she managed to decrypt significant portions of the encrypted communications between Sabrina and her elusive handlers. What these intercepted messages revealed was a conspiracy far more sophisticated, far more cold-blooded than any of them had ever dared to imagine. "Look at this," Emily said, her young voice surprisingly steady as she pulled up intercepted text messages on her tablet, the glowing screen illuminating the gravity of her discovery. "Sabrina isn't just some corporate spy they hired off the street. She's been working for Apex for 3 years, specializing in what they call intimate infiltration of target executives." Ethan's blood ran cold as he read over her shoulder. The messages chillingly detailed Sabrina's previous assignments: a prominent defense contractor in Washington, D.C., a powerful pharmaceutical executive in Boston, a visionary tech startup founder in Seattle. All men, all incredibly successful, and all without exception, had subsequently been destroyed when their valuable trade secrets were stolen and their companies collapsed under a cloud of mysterious scandals. "She's done this before," Ethan said numbly, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Multiple times." "It gets worse," Emily continued, scrolling through more intercepted data, her young face etched with an understanding that transcended her years. "They've been planning your destruction for almost a year. Miles gave them your entire psychological profile, your relationship history, even intimate details about your parents' death." The casual, almost clinical cruelty of it stole Ethan's breath. "They designed Sabrina's entire persona specifically to appeal to you. Every moment of their relationship, every shared laugh, every quiet conversation, every seemingly spontaneous act of affection, her feigned interest in technology, her exaggerated admiration for his work, the tears she'd shed when he'd given her the house key, all of it had been meticulously scripted and performed by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a target to be exploited. This level of sophisticated manipulation, often seen in high-profile fraud cases, demonstrates how deeply con artists study their targets, meticulously crafting personas that exploit vulnerabilities. It's not just about stealing data, it's about stealing trust, identity, and future. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come, a final, devastating blow designed to leave him with nothing. "Tonight's extraction isn't just about stealing your prototype," Emily said, her young voice heavy with a grim understanding that was truly heartbreaking. "They're going to frame you for corporate espionage. Miles has been creating a paper trail that makes it look like you've been selling secrets to foreign competitors for months. When the FBI raids your office tomorrow, they'll find fabricated evidence that you're a traitor to your own country." "What evidence?" Ethan asked, though he dreaded the answer, his mind reeling from the sheer audacity of the plot. "Forged documents in your handwriting," Emily recited, her voice flat. "Bank accounts opened in your name with suspicious deposits, communications with overseas buyers that look real enough to fool seasoned investigators." Emily's eyes met his directly, conveying the full, horrifying scope of their enemy's plan. "They're not just stealing from you, Ethan. They're going to destroy your life so completely that even if you eventually prove your innocence, no one will ever trust you again. Ethan sat in stunned, disbelieving silence as the full magnitude of the trap, its layers of deceit and malicious intent, became horrifyingly clear. His business, his legacy would be utterly ruined. His reputation would be shattered beyond repair. He would almost certainly face federal charges that could put him in prison for decades. And worst of all, Emily would be left alone again, unceremoniously returned to the unforgiving foster system. Her adoptive father, a convicted criminal. Why, he asked finally, the word a choked whisper. Why go to such extremes? The algorithm is valuable, yes, but it's not worth this level of risk and complexity. Because it's not just about the algorithm, Josephine said quietly, her face grave as she continued to read through more of the intercepted communications. Apex Industries is planning a hostile takeover of your entire company. With you disgraced and facing criminal charges, your stock price will collapse. They'll be able to buy controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. It's brilliant in a horrible way, Emily added with the analytical clarity that never failed to amaze Ethan. They get your technology, your company, your market share, and your client base, all for the cost of bribing one employee and hiring one very skilled actress. Ethan looked around the library at these two extraordinary people who had, in the most unlikely way possible, become his family. Josephine, whose unwavering loyalty and quiet wisdom had sustained him through tragedy and triumph, and Emily, whose courage and unexpected insight had saved him from a destruction he had never even seen coming. They were depending on him, now more than ever, to protect them, and he had almost failed them completely. Not if we stop them first, he said, his voice carrying the hard, steely edge of determination that had built his empire from nothing. Josephine, can you get us copies of everything Miles has been falsifying? I want to know exactly what evidence they're planning to plant. Already working on it, she replied with a small, knowing smile that was pure steel. I've been his assistant for 5 years. I know where he keeps everything. And Emily, Ethan turned to the 8-year-old, who had somehow transformed into his most valuable ally. How much can you intercept their communications without them detecting you? All of it, she said with quiet confidence. They're using encrypted channels, but they're not expecting to be monitored by their own surveillance equipment. I can see every message, every plan, every backup strategy they prepared. Then here's what we're going to do, Ethan said, feeling the familiar, thrilling rush of a high-stakes chess game where he finally understood his opponent's entire strategy. We're going to let them execute their plan exactly as they've designed it. But when they reach for the prize, they're going to find we've set a trap of our own. What kind of trap? Emily asked, her eyes bright with a mixture of anticipation and strategic understanding. Ethan's smile was sharp as a blade, a glint of the old, ruthless businessman returning. The kind that turns predators into prey. Tomorrow night, when they think they're destroying me, we're going to destroy them instead. And we're going to make sure the whole world knows exactly what they tried to do. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan felt like himself again. Not the love-struck fool who had been so easily manipulated by a beautiful, cunning woman. Not the betrayed friend who had been so cruelly sold out by his business partner, but the strategic thinker, the relentless problem solver who had built something extraordinary from nothing and wasn't about to let anyone take it away. The game, he realized, was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Justice rarely comes easy, especially when power and greed are involved, but it is always, always worth fighting for. When have you had to stand up against people who underestimated your strength or the strength of those around you? The next evening arrived with the palpable weight of destiny hanging in the humid air, like storm clouds gathering ominously before a lightning strike. Ethan's house, which had been a haven of warmth and growing trust just days ago, now felt like an elaborate stage set for the final climactic act of a gripping drama, where everything, his future, his freedom, his fragile new family, hung precariously in the balance. Sabrina moved through the house with her usual effortless grace, meticulously preparing for what she believed would be her triumphant final performance. She had spent the day playing the role of the concerned girlfriend to perfection, asking worried questions about Ethan's stress levels, gently suggesting they have a quiet dinner at home to help him relax before his supposed big product launch the following morning. She had no idea that every comforting word she spoke was being meticulously recorded. Every subtle move she made was being carefully monitored, and every electronic signal from her expertly hidden communication devices was being intercepted and decoded by an 8-year-old girl who had learned the intricate art of espionage out of sheer necessity and refined it through pure, unwavering determination. "The extraction begins at 11 p.m. sharp," Emily whispered to Ethan as they passed in the hallway, her voice barely audible. "Miles will create a distraction by triggering the fire alarm at your office building, while security is focused on that. Sabrina will download the final algorithm files and transmit them to the overseas buyers. And the frame job is already in motion. The FBI has received an anonymous tip about suspicious activity in your accounts. They're planning to raid your office at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, just after the technology transfer is complete." Ethan marveled again at the terrifying sophistication of their enemies' planning. Every single detail had been meticulously orchestrated to ensure maximum damage to him with minimal risk to themselves. If Emily hadn't detected their surveillance, if she hadn't trusted her instincts and continued investigating, despite being dismissed by the adults around her, the trap would have been absolutely perfect, springing shut with devastating efficiency. But they had detected it, and now the hunters were about to discover they'd been hunting something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. At 10:30 p.m., Ethan made his carefully calculated move. "I'm going to check on some files at the office," he announced to Sabrina, who was curled up on the living room couch with a book, the picture of domestic contentment. "I know it's late, but I want to review everything one more time before tomorrow's presentation." Sabrina's eyes flickered, just for an instant, with something that might have been suppressed excitement, a tiny spark of anticipation. "Of course, darling. You know how important this is." She offered a supportive smile. "I'll just stay here and finish my book." "Actually," Ethan said,
caught a fleeting
as if the
glimpse
thought
of
had
pure
just
calculation
calculation
behind her
otherwise loving
"Why don't you come with
smile.
me?
I could
The
use the
rapid
company,
mental adjustment
and you always
as
make
she
me
weighed
feel
the
more
implications
confident of this unexpected,
For a split second,
last-minute
Sabrina's carefully
constructed
"I'd
mask
love to,
slipped.
really,"
she said finally, her voice regaining its smooth, seductive quality. "But I'm feeling a bit tired. Besides, you work better when you're not distracted by me." She accompanied this with the sultry smile that had captivated him for months, a smile he now recognized as a meticulously rehearsed tool of her trade. "You're probably right," Ethan agreed, leaning down to give her a chaste kiss on her forehead. "I'll be back in a few hours." He left through the front door, making sure she heard his car start and smoothly drive away down the long, curving driveway. But instead of heading to his downtown office, Ethan shrewdly circled back through the dense woods behind his property and slipped quietly into the house through a rarely used basement entrance Josephine had deliberately left unlocked for him. From the hidden observation post they'd set up in the unused maid's quarters, Ethan, Emily, and Josephine watched Sabrina spring into action. The moment she was certain Ethan's car was truly gone, her entire demeanor underwent a chilling transformation. The soft, loving girlfriend vanished completely, replaced by a focused, efficient professional who moved with predatory purpose. She retrieved a sophisticated laptop from a cleverly concealed hiding place she'd created in the guest bathroom, connected it to Ethan's home network, and began what was clearly a well-rehearsed, high-speed process of data infiltration. "She's good," Emily whispered admiringly, a hint of professional respect in her voice despite the circumstances. "Watch how she's bypassing the security protocols. She must have been studying your system for months." "Not good enough," Ethan replied grimly, watching the data flow on their own monitoring screens. "She's downloading from the decoy server we set up this afternoon. Every file she's stealing is either worthless or contains tracking malware that will lead us straight to her buyers." Meanwhile, Josephine efficiently monitored communications from Miles, who was indeed at Ethan's downtown office building, meticulously preparing to trigger the fire alarm that would provide the necessary cover for Sabrina's activities. His text messages to his Apex handlers, intercepted by Emily, revealed a man utterly convinced he was about to become wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. At 11:15 p.m. sharp, everything seemed to proceed exactly according to the conspirators' elaborate plan. The fire alarm blared at Ethan's office building, instantly creating chaos as security teams responded to what appeared to be a genuine emergency. Miles, hidden in the confusion, prepared to plant the forged evidence that would frame Ethan for treason. Simultaneously, Sabrina completed her rapid download and began transmitting the stolen files to encrypted servers overseas. What they didn't know, however, was that every single step of their meticulously planned operation was being broadcast live to a secure government server, where federal agents were meticulously recording everything for what would become one of the most comprehensive cases of corporate espionage in recent American history. At 11:45 p.m., Sabrina received the text message she'd been waiting for. Package delivered. Initiate Phase 2. Phase 2, she knew, was the destruction of all incriminating evidence and her own swift disappearance. Within minutes, she would delete all traces of her activities, plant the final devastating pieces of fabricated evidence against Ethan, and vanish forever. By tomorrow morning, she fully expected to be on a private plane to a non-extradition country, with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life, her mission flawlessly executed. Instead, as she turned from her laptop, she found herself looking directly into the calm, resolute faces of Ethan, Emily, and Josephine as they emerged from their hiding place. "Hello, Sabrina," Ethan said calmly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Or should I call you by your real name?" Rebecca Santos, age 31, wanted by the FBI for industrial espionage in 4 states. The transformation was instantaneous and chillingly complete. The woman who had spent months convincing him she loved him, whose tears he had so recently believed, simply vanished. In her place stood someone whose eyes held nothing but cold, calculated fury and barely contained rage. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," she snarled, her voice now carrying an entirely different, harsher accent. "This is bigger than your little company, bigger than your naive understanding of how the world really works." "You're right," Ethan agreed, his voice steady. "It is bigger than I understood. That's why the FBI has been recording everything for the past 6 hours. That's why your buyers overseas are actually federal agents conducting a sophisticated sting operation. And that's why Miles is currently being arrested at my office building." Sabrina's face went white as the full, devastating scope of their counter-operation became horrifyingly clear. "Impossible," she whispered, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. "We monitored everything. We controlled every variable." "You controlled every variable except one," Emily said, stepping forward with the quiet confidence of someone who had outmaneuvered adults far more experienced than herself. Her small voice cut through the tension. "You never considered that an 8-year-old foster kid might be smarter than your entire operation." The look Sabrina turned on Emily was pure, unadulterated venom. I wouldn't finish that sentence," Ethan interrupted, his voice carrying a warning that made Sabrina involuntarily take a step backward. "You're talking to the person who saved my life and exposed your entire criminal network. Show some respect." Outside, the distant wail of sirens grew rapidly louder, closer, as federal agents swarmed the house. The trap that had taken months for the conspirators to meticulously set was finally springing shut, not on Ethan, but on the very people who tried to destroy him. Justice, Ethan reflected, sometimes came in the most unexpected packages. The most satisfying victories in life are often the ones where the underestimated rise up, using their unique strengths to protect what matters most. It's a testament to the fact that power isn't always about brute force, but often about cunning, resilience, and the courage to speak truth to power. 6 weeks later, Ethan stood in the hushed courthouse lobby, watching as Miles Wren, his former CFO and supposed best friend, was led away in handcuffs. Miles now faced federal charges that would likely keep him imprisoned for the next 2 decades. The man who had helped him build his company from nothing, who had shared dreams and struggles, and what Ethan had believed was genuine, unwavering friendship, now looked right through him, as if he were a complete stranger. Betrayal, Ethan had learned firsthand, left scars that went far deeper than any physical wound, etching themselves onto the soul. But healing, he was discovering, could come from the most unexpected and indeed most beautiful sources. "He looks smaller than I remembered," Emily observed quietly from beside him, her voice thoughtful. At 8 years old, she had become the star witness in a sprawling federal investigation that had unraveled a complex corporate espionage network spanning multiple industries and several countries. Her testimony had been so remarkably clear, so astonishingly detailed, and so technologically sophisticated that prosecutors were calling it the most compelling evidence they had ever presented in a white-collar crime case. "People usually do when you see them clearly, Emily," Josephine replied, her gentle hands adjusting the new dress Emily wore for the occasion. The formal adoption proceedings had concluded just an hour earlier, and Emily Monroe was now officially, legally, and permanently a part of their family. Ethan looked down at the adoption certificate clutched in his hands, the legal document that, to him, meant far less than the profound emotional truth they had all discovered over the past 2 months. Family, he realized with a powerful clarity, wasn't about paperwork or shared blood relations or even simply good intentions. It was about choosing to stand together, fiercely and unwavering, when the world tried its hardest to tear you apart. It was about trust, painstakingly earned through crisis, and love undeniably proven through action, through the shared crucible of adversity. "So what happens now?" Emily asked, slipping her small hand into his. The gesture was natural now, comfortable, speaking volumes of security and belonging rather than politeness or duty. "Now we go home," Ethan said simply, his voice filled with a quiet contentment. "To our home." The house felt profoundly different when they walked through the front door that evening. The insidious surveillance equipment had been meticulously removed. The hidden cameras and listening devices that had transformed their sanctuary into a stage for deception were thankfully gone. But more than that, the very air felt cleaner, more honest, infused with a newfound lightness it hadn't possessed since Sabrina had first crossed the threshold with her calculated smiles and scripted affection. They had spent the past few weeks redecorating together, the three of them meticulously choosing new furniture, warm colors, and meaningful artwork that reflected who they genuinely were now, rather than who they thought they should be to impress others. Emily's vibrant drawings now hung proudly in elegant frames alongside expensive paintings. Josephine's cherished family photos, depicting generations of her own loving bonds, had been given places of honor on the mantelpiece. The sprawling house had, in every sense that truly mattered, become a true home. "I have something for you," Ethan told Emily as they settled into the living room, sharing mugs of hot chocolate in the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to perform for each other. He handed her a small, neatly wrapped box, watching as her brown eyes widened with the pure delight of a child who was still, wonderfully, learning that truly good surprises were possible in her life. Inside the box was a device that looked strikingly similar to a sophisticated smartphone, but was in fact something far more special. It was a prototype security scanner Ethan had been developing specifically for her, incorporating all the ingenious techniques she'd used to detect the surveillance equipment that had ultimately saved them both. "It's yours," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. "Your own invention based entirely on your innovations. I've filed the patents in your name." Emily stared at the sleek device, then up at him, her brown eyes filling with a mixture of disbelief and tears. "Mine? Really mine?" "Really yours," Ethan confirmed, a warm smile spreading across his face. "You're now the youngest patent holder in the history of cybersecurity technology, and when you turn 18, the licensing fees alone will have generated enough money to pay for any college you want to attend, anywhere in the world." But it wasn't the financial implications that brought tears to Emily's eyes. It was the profound recognition, the official acknowledgement that her contributions had been real, invaluable, and truly worthy of protection. For a child who had spent years being dismissed, overlooked, and made to feel invisible, having her innovations legally recognized and protected was a validation of the deepest, most meaningful kind. "There's something else," Josephine said gently, producing a crisp envelope from her purse. "This came today." Inside was a letter from the FBI's Cybercrimes Division, formally thanking Emily for her extraordinary assistance in breaking up what they were now calling one of the most sophisticated industrial espionage rings in American history. They were officially recommending her for a civilian commendation, an honor that would become a permanent part of her record and a powerful testament to her courage and remarkable capabilities. They want to know if you'd be interested in consulting work when you're older, Ethan explained, a twinkle in his eye. Apparently your methods impress some very important people in Washington. Emily looked at the letter, then at the two adults who had, against all odds, become her chosen family, and smiled with pure, unadulterated happiness. Will you help me write back to them? Of course, Ethan said, his voice warm with affection. We'll do it together, everything together from now on. As evening settled softly around them, they talked about practical, everyday things, school schedules, upcoming vacation plans, and the extensive security upgrades they wanted to install now that they fully understood how vulnerable their previous systems had been. But underneath these ordinary domestic conversations ran a deeper, stronger current of connection and unwavering commitment. They had been tested by betrayal and ensnared by conspiracy, targeted by people who had cruelly tried to use their trust against them and wield their burgeoning love as a weapon for destruction. Yet they had survived, not just intact, but stronger, bound together by crisis in ways that good times alone could never have achieved. I love you both, Emily said softly as Josephine tucked her into bed that night. The words spoken with the simple, direct honesty of someone who no longer feared that love was temporary or conditional. We love you too, darling, Josephine replied, kissing her forehead. Forever and always. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching this precious bedtime ritual, thinking about how completely his life had transformed. Just 6 months ago, he had been a successful but undeniably lonely man who had adopted a child out of a sense of obligation and social responsibility. Tonight, he was part of a family, a true unit that had chosen each other through trial by fire and emerged more resilient and connected than he had ever imagined possible. Love, he had learned, wasn't something that simply happened to you. It was something you actively did every single day through the myriad small acts of attention and care that unequivocally declared, "You're important to me, you matter, your voice is heard." And trust, real trust, he now understood, wasn't given blindly. It was meticulously earned through consistency, profoundly proven through crisis, and honored through the conscious choice to keep choosing each other, even when the path was difficult. As he quietly turned off Emily's lights and headed to his own room, Ethan reflected on the most profound lesson he had never expected to learn from an 8-year-old girl. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths, and the people you least expect to save you turn out to be exactly the family you never knew you needed. Real family is built through choosing each other, again and again, especially when it's hardest. Who has chosen you, and who have you chosen in return in those defining moments of life? 1 year later, Ethan Monroe stood by the window of his home office, the very same room where a small girl had once whispered words that irrevocably changed everything. He watched Emily install complex security software on Josephine's laptop with the patient, confident expertise of someone who had found her calling early in life. The afternoon sun streamed through windows that now held no secrets, illuminating a space that had been transformed from a target for insidious espionage into a sanctuary for innovation and genuine connection. The walls proudly displayed framed articles about their remarkable story, including a prominent feature in Forbes magazine titled "The 8-Year-Old Who Revolutionized Corporate Security," and a heartwarming piece in People magazine titled "The Family That Fought Back." But the most treasured item in the room was a simple, handwritten note from Emily, framed elegantly on his desk. "Thank you for finally listening. Love, your daughter." Your daughter. Not an adopted daughter, not foster daughter, just daughter. The distinction mattered, resonating with a depth that legal documents could never fully capture. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mr. Ethan?" Josephine asked from the doorway, her voice carrying the gentle, familiar concern of someone who had watched him painstakingly rebuild his life from the ground up over the past year. Ethan nodded, looking at the calendar on his desk. Today marked exactly 1 year since Sabrina's arrest, 1 year since the sweeping federal raids that had exposed the Apex Industries conspiracy, and precisely 1 year since their unique family had been forged in the intense fire of betrayal and emerged stronger than ever before. It was also the day he had chosen to make an announcement that would, once again, change everything. Ladies, he said, gathering his courage in the profoundly new way he had learned over the past year, not by suppressing his emotions, but by acknowledging them, integrating them, and moving forward anyway. I have something important to tell you both. Emily looked up from the laptop, her brown eyes bright with curiosity. At 9 years old, she had grown taller, more confident, but she still possessed the same watchful intelligence that had saved them all. The crucial difference now was that her vigilance stemmed from a place of quiet strength rather than paralyzing fear, from the deep-seated security of knowing she was wanted and valued, rather than the terror of potential abandonment. I've decided to step back from the day-to-day operations at my company, Ethan continued, seeing the surprise flicker across Josephine's face. I'm promoting Sarah Chen to CEO, and I'm going to focus on research and development. Specifically, I want to work on technology that helps protect families like ours. Josephine smiled knowingly. So, you're going to build better security systems for homes, among other things? Exactly, Ethan affirmed. But more importantly, I want to be present for this family in ways I wasn't before. I want to be the kind of father who hears what his daughter is trying to tell him the first time she says it, not the 20th. Emily's face lit up with pure joy, a smile that radiated profound happiness. Does this mean you'll have time to help me with the new scanner prototype? It means I'll have time for whatever matters to you, Ethan replied, his voice filled with tenderness. School projects, science fairs, teaching you to drive when you're old enough, scaring away boys when you start dating in about 20 years. 20 years? Emily laughed, the sound bright and carefree. That seems a bit excessive. 30 years then. I'm flexible, Ethan retorted playfully, a rare genuine laugh bubbling up from deep within him. Josephine shook her head with fond exasperation. Men always thinking they can control timing when it comes to matters of the heart. But her eyes held deep approval as she watched the easy, loving banter between father and daughter. This was what she had hoped for when she had first encouraged Ethan to truly listen to Emily. Not just the resolution of a crisis, but the building of a genuine relationship that would sustain them through all the ordinary challenges and joys that lay ahead. There's something else, Ethan said, his tone growing more serious, the thoughtful intensity returning to his eyes. I've been thinking a lot about what we learned this year, about how easy it is for people to be fooled by those who prey on trust and loneliness. I want to do something about that. He pulled out a meticulously prepared business plan he'd been working on for months, pages filled with detailed proposals and financial projections for something entirely new. I want to start a foundation, he explained, his gaze sweeping over Emily and Josephine. An organization that helps people who've been targeted by confidence schemes, romance scams, corporate espionage, any kind of sophisticated deception. I want to provide resources for victims, specialized training for law enforcement, and educational programs that teach people to recognize the warning signs before it's too late. What would you call it? Emily asked, already scanning through the proposal with a rapid comprehension that never ceased to amaze him. The Emily Foundation, Ethan said simply, his gaze holding her. Named after the person who taught me that wisdom doesn't come from age or experience alone. It comes from paying attention to the truth, even when that truth is inconvenient or painful. Emily stared at him, speechless for one of the few times in their relationship. The idea that her name would be associated with helping others, that her painful experiences and sharp insights would be actively used to protect people from the very kind of deception they had faced, clearly overwhelmed her in the best possible way. I think, Josephine said quietly, a proud smile gracing her lips, that sounds like exactly the right way to honor what you've all learned. Over the following months, as the foundation began to take shape and embark on its crucial work, Ethan discovered that the lessons Emily had taught him extended far beyond cybersecurity and corporate espionage. She had shown him, through her very being, that listening, truly listening, to the people you love was the foundational bedrock of every meaningful relationship. She had demonstrated that trust wasn't something you gave automatically, but something you painstakingly built through consistent actions, through shared vulnerabilities, and through unwavering support over time. She taught him that family wasn't about who shared your DNA, but about who chose to stand beside you when life tried its hardest to knock you down. Most importantly, she taught him that some of the most profound and essential truths come from the smallest voices, the children, the overlooked, the underestimated, who see clearly because they haven't yet learned to doubt their own pure perceptions in favor of what others expect them to believe. On the first anniversary of the Emily Foundation, they received a heartfelt letter from a woman in Ohio whose elderly mother had been saved from a devastating romance scam by information she'd learned from their educational programs. The would-be victim had recognized the subtle warning signs and, crucially, had contacted authorities instead of blindly sending money to someone who claimed to love her but had never met her in person. "One more family safe," Emily said softly as she read the letter aloud during dinner that night, her voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. One more person who listened to that little voice inside that says something's not right. "Speaking of little voices," Ethan said, a warm smile playing on his lips, "what is yours telling you about your future, Emily? You're getting older, developing your own dreams and goals. What do you want to do with all that brilliance of yours?" Emily considered the question with characteristic seriousness, her brow furrowed in thought. "I want to keep learning about technology, about people, about how to protect the things that matter. And I want to help other kids who don't have families yet find theirs, the way I found mine." "That sounds like a perfect plan, darling," Josephine said warmly, her eyes twinkling. "And you'll always have us to support you, whatever you decide." As they cleared the dinner dishes together, a family ritual that had become precious to all of them, Ethan reflected on how completely his understanding of true success had changed. A year ago, he had measured his worth by profit margins and market share, by the size of his bank account and the recognition of his peers. Now he measured it by Emily's uninhibited laughter, by Josephine's quiet contentment, by the profound knowledge that they'd built something real and lasting together. He measured it by the countless families they'd helped through the foundation, by the young people who'd learned to trust their instincts because of Emily's powerful example, by the simple but profound satisfaction of living a life aligned with his deepest values. That night, as he tucked Emily into bed, a ritual she still cherished despite her growing independence, she looked up at him with those wise brown eyes that had seen too much, too early, but had never lost their innate capacity for hope. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what, sweetheart?" Ethan whispered, kissing her forehead, his heart full of boundless gratitude for the child who had taught him that the most important conversations often begin with whispers, and that the smallest voices sometimes carry the greatest wisdom. "For listening," she continued, "for believing me, for becoming the kind of father who hears what his daughter is trying to tell him." "Thank you," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion, "for teaching me how to listen." Outside, the world continued its complex, chaotic dance of joy and sorrow, triumph and betrayal, connection and profound loss. But inside their home, three people who had chosen each other slept peacefully, protected not just by sophisticated security systems, but by the deeper, more profound security of being known, valued, and loved exactly as they were. And in the morning, they would wake up together, ready to face whatever challenges came their way, secure in the unwavering knowledge that some families are built through crisis and strengthened through choice, and that the most powerful force in the world is a small voice speaking truth to those wise enough to listen. Your voice matters, no matter how small it might seem. Your instincts are valuable. Your observations are important. Your truth is worth sharing. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that they're seen, heard, and valued. Like this video if you believe in the power of chosen family, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the strength found in unexpected places. Sometimes the person who saves us is the one we least expect, and sometimes that person is ourselves.